Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. And this week isn't a real episode. Well, actually, you are getting an episode this week. But what this episode is a sample episode. I like to do this every now and then and drop a preview of a full episode, which you can access over on the Patreon page. So I just want everyone to be informed. If you like the deep dive analysis that I have done over the years on Stephen King, well, you know that when those of us who were growing up in the 80s and 90s, when we were coming of age and falling in love with horror, there were two authors in the horror section, both with the last name K, that people often talked about as either or, much in the way that we talked about McDonald's or Burger King, or Coke or Pepsi. And in this case, it is Stephen King or Dean Koontz. And I have not covered Dean Koontz on the Stephen King cast, though I grew up being a Dean Koontz fan, as many of us were. And it has been an absolute blast to be able to re-explore and examine Dean Koontz almost for the first time all of these years later over on the Patreon page. So it's been great. I've went through all my old boxes of books, and I pulled out my Dean Koontz collection. Some are missing. I can't find some of them, but I have decided to start to tackle the ones that I don't remember as well. So what you're going to get in this episode, this sample episode, are my thoughts on Dean Koontz. So I have had the pleasure of reading Winter Moon and Dragon Tears, Servants of Twilight, and Twilight Eyes so far, and Watchers. So I have done reviews for Dragon Eyes, Servants of Twilight, Dragon Tears, and what you're getting in this episode is the first of the Dean Koontz books that I dusted off to reread, Winter Moon. As you'll hear in this introductory part of the podcast episode that I'm providing as a free sample to everyone, I don't have strong memories of Winter Moon, which made this such an enjoyable experience. I have mismemories. I don't know how you would call it. I misremembered what Winter Moon was, and I do distinctly remember not liking Winter Moon when I was younger because it's not what I wanted it to be. So this really allowed me to go in with as clean and fresh and blank a slate as the snow on a Montana field, for those of you who catch that reference from Winter Moon. So that was a blast to revisit, and it was a blast to be able to talk about. So before I get into the preview of Winter Moon, I've gotten a lot of messages about Dean Koontz. So this is something that people are really responding to. So I've posted some content on Instagram and Facebook and Blue Sky, and it's definitely resulted with striking a chord in people. So I think that there's some response, and people feel strongly about Dean Koontz. So, Christian said, growing up in the 80s, I read all of King, Straub, Saul, etc., but never gave Koontz a chance. A couple years ago, I picked up House at the End of the World and loved it. I've been making my way through his works ever since. Wes wrote, Twilight Eyes is one of his best. The first 3 Frankenstein books are great as well. I will have thoughts on Twilight Eyes, which you can get over on the Patreon page. The Frankenstein books I have not checked out. Dan writes, King is way better, but I do like Koontz too. Cold Fire, Intensity, Strangers, Door to December, and Lightning were my favorites. Odd Thomas was good too, but it dropped off after the first book. And some of those I will actually get into. If you don't know what Cold Fire is about or Intensity is about, I actually discuss the titles of Dean Koontz books in the Koontzisms section of my reviews, because I have a lot of thoughts on the tricks and traits and tropes and trappings that you see from Dean Koontz books from work to work to work. So what I did with the Stephen King cast, I do for Dean Koontz, which has been a lot of fun. Kevin writes, I love The Bad Place. Absolutely bonkers, and it was a blast. I don't remember The Bad Place, but I'm looking forward to getting to The Bad Place. D Dagger 2024 writes, I was so into Dean Koontz back in the day. My first read was The Key to Midnight. For a time back then, all I read was Dean Koontz, John Saul, and Stephen King. It was a good time. Dax Leone II writes, I have enjoyed every one of his books. I remember vividly where I was when I read this being Twilight Eyes. I was outside of Camp Verde, Arizona, at a campground on the Clear Creek River called Bullpen. Good times. And that is why I love doing what I do with this podcast, is to help celebrate these moments where the experience of reading bleeds into who you are as a human and where you are in a moment in time. And so I hope that in exploring Dean Koontz, it's able to unlock a door for all of you and go back to a time when possibly you were a large Dean Koontz fan, and maybe you have fallen off the way that I had, the way that some of the other listeners have over the years, but hopefully we're able to rediscover him together. And then another person writes, my first book was Eyes of Darkness, bought from a yard sale. That started a lifetime love of reading his books. Still mad about the lost third book to Moonlight Bay. Moonlight Bay, everyone. I don't know I think it's Christopher Snow. That's the name of the character. He wrote 2 novels, much in the way that he did with the Odd Thomas character, Christopher Snow, he had an eyesight condition, I believe. And they were bonkers novels, and so much fun. And he was supposed to do a third, and he never did. He continued the Odd Thomas series, which I kind of fell off of. Like the previous person had said, I enjoyed the first one, and I'll always remember the name Stormy Llewellyn. I loved that name, but I feel that they started falling off in quality. And then C Woodcock00 writes, I wore myself out on Koontz back in the 90s, but I have revisited a few of the better ones over the years, and this being Twilight Eyes, this was a post I made about Twilight Eyes, is one of my favorites. I feel like many of us were introduced to Koontz because his books were always right next to King in the horror section, and eventually we ended up buying some. That's exactly what happened to me, and I do agree with you, C Woodcock00. I believe that that's what happened to a lot of us, which is why it's going to be fun to do a lot of revisiting, but not for everyone. And I do want to share this one comment that was made by T Falk 42, and it's such a harsh burn. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but it is worthy of discussion, and for all of you to hear. They write, King was Transformers, Koontz was GoBots. Really no comparison. That is harsh, but that is funny. And I want to know what you all think. Do you agree with T Falk 42, or do you agree with the others who really enjoyed Dean Koontz's works, and those of you who think that maybe he is worthy of being included alongside on the same stature, or maybe just one tier below Stephen King? Let me know by writing into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. Thank you for indulging me as I begin to explore Dean Koontz, and please enjoy this sample episode of my review of Winter Moon. And this is just a sample episode that you can get the full thing over on Patreon, and over there as well you can also get the reviews of Servants of Twilight, Dragon Tears, Twilight Eyes, and Winter Moon, with more to come. Additionally, just so everyone knows, I have also completed a review of Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, and my review of the sequel, The Vampire Lestat, will be coming soon as I start to sink my fangs into the Vampire Chronicles to get everyone ready for regular reviews of the 3rd season of AMC's Interview with the Vampire, a series that I strongly recommend that everyone go watch. If you haven't, watch the first 2 seasons. You have time to catch up, and you're going to love them. It's one of the best vampire pieces of fiction ever committed to insert blank there. Movies. TV, books, just flat out one of the best vampire stories that you're ever going to get. The more that I sit with this, the more I think that the show improves upon the source material, and that's not a knock on Anne Rice, but the decisions that they make are so carefully thought out, so nuanced, so thoughtful, and I really do believe improve the source material. But that is a story that we can explore when we talk more about Interview with a Vampire and the Vampire Lestat and regular reviews of the third season of the Interview with the Vampire Lestat over on AMC. So it's going to be a great summer, everyone. You got Dean Koontz, you got Stephen King, you got Anne Rice, you got reviews of all of the horror movies coming. You're going to have regular reviews of House of the Dragon, which you can find all of that over on Patreon. And so without further ado, please enjoy the sample episode from my review of Winter Moon. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week I'll review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in chronological order of publication. Not this week, everyone, because at long last, I'm doing something that I had wondered if I would ever do on this feed for this podcast. And yes, sir, yes, madam, I am doing it. I'm going there. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are listening to this episode, you are listening to me for the first time in podcast form, reviewing and examining the works of Dean Koontz. So why is this cracking me up? It's cracking me up because, I mean, listen, Dean Koontz is a very successful author. A very, very, very successful author. For those of us who experienced the heyday of horror in the 80s and 90s, these two were positioned as competitors with one another. It's not a fair way to really judge either one of them or frame either one of them, because that's not. I mean, they're two authors who happen to be both successful, both whose names started with the letter K. So when you would peruse the horror section in your local bookstore or library, you'd be looking through the Kings, and there's a huge bookshelf of just King books and King books and King books and King books and multiple copies and multiple editions, and right, and you got your hardcover, you got your softcover, all of them there. Oh my God, there's so many. And then in between KI and KO, there's other authors here and there, blah blah blah. And all of a sudden, then you get to the KO, the Koontz. Then there's a giant Koontz section with all of these books and all of these editions and all hardcovers and softcovers. And so it's just on a very surface level, it's very easy to make these comparisons, between the two. But I just think that people like to create strife and rivalry where there isn't, and so there was this false narrative of that there's a competition, though there wasn't, and that all came from readers and the media. Not saying that there was an animosity between Dean Koontz and Stephen King. That wasn't a thing, but it was just, do you like Stephen King or do you like Dean Koontz? Who's the better author, Stephen King or Dean Koontz? Like that, there was always that, and I'm guilty of that. We all are. Dean Koontz, pop culture's anointed competitor to Stephen King, the legendary I don't write horror author of horror. Though I do get that, I do get it. Like reading his stuff, they there are horror elements for sure, but they really are do lean more towards thriller. Dean Koontz, the dog lover of golden retrievers. Dean Koontz, he of the West Coast. Dean Koontz. And I chuckled because just, he, unfairly gets compared to King and unfairly gets, really ridiculed, for it. I think of that Family Guy skit, when Brian, runs over somebody. He goes, "Oh my God, are you Stephen King?" "No, I'm Dean Koontz," and then backs over him again. That's so mean. It's mean. It's mean. And it's such a pot shot. And I had, for years, really enjoyed Dean Koontz. When I was reading Stephen King, I was reading Dean Koontz. And I soaked up his books. I really enjoyed reading Dean Koontz stuff back in the day. I think, did I start with Watchers or did I start with Servants of Twilight? I can't remember which one it was. It doesn't matter. I remember loving both of them. And from there, I got hooked on Dean Koontz. And when you really enjoy an author and they have a catalog that's extensive as someone like Dean Koontz, then you've hit the jackpot. So, other, Strangers, Phantoms, and then a bunch of other books whose titles I don't really remember because all of his titles are unnecessarily vague. You can just switch and swap his book titles with his plots, and they really has no bearing on matching them. It doesn't really matter. But no, I looked back. I always look back fondly on Dean Koontz books and my experience with them. But I think pop culturally speaking, he kind of becomes a punching bag. He's kind of the punchline to a joke. If Stephen King is taken seriously, Dean Koontz is not. And it is interesting because with as many books as he has published in his career, which is like over 100 books, he hasn't found that crossover appeal or the level of pop cultural success that Stephen King has, which is really astounding for me. I mean, his movie output is not nearly, it's not even a fraction of what Stephen King's is. He had Watchers adapted, starring Corey Haim. You would figure that would be a bigger movie, but it kind of fizzled, it tanked. There was Hideaway. Is that the name of the movie? Is it Hideaway with Jeff Goldblum, who comes back from the dead? He has a near-death experience. Again, why, if that is Hideaway, and if I remember correctly, it is Hideaway, why is that the title of a near-death experience book? But anyway, there was, I believe, Mr. Murder had a TV miniseries. And then Phantoms. Phantoms was a big blockbuster movie starring Ben Affleck, but I think that it's at this point more remembered for the Kevin Smith. Affleck was the bomb in Phantoms, yo, by Jason Mewes in one of the Viewer universe. What is it? The Viewer Hold on, I need to figure out what the universe is called. The Viewisk universe. Okay, that was just not ringing off. It was not rolling off the tongue the way that I wanted it to. But Phantoms kind of fizzled. It lives on as a joke. He's had some TV miniseries stuff here and there. Odd Thomas, starring Anton Yelchin, I believe, had come out about 10 or so years ago. And unfortunately, despite Odd Thomas being a very successful book franchise for Dean Koontz, that didn't manifest into a film franchise. So it's just interesting to me that he hasn't found that level of success, because there are quite a few novels that just are blockbuster movies, and that's the one that I'm going to be talking about today, Winter Moon. I don't know why this is not a movie. This felt like a movie when I was reading it. It felt specifically like a 1980s movie when I was reading it, and I feel like it could be a very successful modern movie set in the 1980s with a throwback aesthetic and feeling to it. I think that would be a movie that people talk about, like, yo, go see Winter Moon. Have you seen it? Because it there's so much to it that is wild and weird, gnarly and fun. that I think that modern audiences would really respond to, and it would, you could sell it with that nostalgic lens. So a couple years ago, I had realized that I was not reading nearly as much as I wanted to or need to for my soul. Growing up, I read a lot. At the height of my Stephen King fandom, I was reading all of the time. Post college, and finding myself in adulthood, I slowed down a lot. And as in the last 10 years, once I started doing the Stephen King cast, it was primarily Stephen King books, and I really slowed down. After diving so deeply into Stephen King from an analytical lens, my kind of fried my brain a little bit, and I just wasn't really doing much reading at all. COVID hit, and man, did I dive back in. That was a benefit to COVID that I had the time, and I took advantage of that time that I had, and I read a lot. And then I decided to give myself a challenge last year, saying I want to read as many books as I can, and I'm going to count how many books it is. And I read quite a few, and then 2025, I had an incredibly successful year. And I'm doing okay in 2026 so far. It has slowed down a little bit because I have been podcasting more, but it's been great to be reading a lot. And the reason I say this is because I was waiting on a new book to arrive in the mail, and I needed to have something to read in the days that I was waiting for the new book to come. So what did I do? I went into the basement. I started digging around some boxes in the basement of my old books that I had. I don't really have a lot of storage space in the house, so everything is in boxes in the basement, and that's an adventure to get to them. So I'm digging through the boxes, and and then what do I find? I find some Dean Koontz books. I don't find all of my Dean Koontz books, and I wonder where all of them are. So that's going to be another adventure trying to find all of them. But I did find some. I found Winter Moon. I found Servants of Twilight. I found Strangers, I found Phantoms, I found Twilight Eyes, so I said, okay, the Winter Moon was the first one that I found, and Winter Moon is not one of the ones that I go to. It's not one of my ones that I remember distinctly. It's one that I remember not liking, and here's the reason why I did not like it. I remember not liking it because I wanted it to be a werewolf story, and it wasn't a werewolf story, therefore I didn't like it. That was my mind at the time, and as a result, my memories are very, very fuzzy and vague. So this was a prime opportunity for me to re-engage with King, but not with Koontz, but not with one of the ones that I remember fondly, but with something that deserves a second chance. And so 30 years later, here we go. I get to have a second chance with Winter Moon. All right, everyone. So thank you for listening to this sample episode so far. Where I leave off, I get into the Wikipedia summary, so I have a basis upon which I can build my analysis, and then get into the ins and the outs of what makes Winter Moon such a strong novel, why it is so suspenseful, why it is so thrilling, and I start to analyze Koontz's strengths, some of his weaknesses, and like I said earlier in this episode, the Koontzism, the tricks and traits and tropes that Dean Koontz falls into, those patterns that we see that he likes to explore from book to book to book to book, which is really fun to examine and discover as I continue to make my way almost for the first time, because it's been so long since I have really been a massive Dean Koontz fan, finding all of those patterns almost for the first time. So thank you, everyone. I hope that you liked this sample episode. Like I said earlier, you have the full episode over on Patreon, along with full reviews of Servants of Twilight, Dragon Tears, and Twilight Eyes as well, with more to come down the road this summer, as well as reviews of The Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice and The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice, as we get ready for regular coverage of the television show, which is awesome. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for supporting the Stephen King cast in all of its forms. And if you have any thoughts on anything that I said today, please write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. You can head on over to the Patreon page by going to patreon.com/StephenKingcast. And may you have long days and pleasant nights. And I will see you here next time where MOON spells Dean Koontz cast.